Welcome to the Matt Sager Podcast, Monday, January 14th. I'm back. My health is not all the way back, but put it this way. My health is faring much better than the Rotten Tomatoes score for M. Night Shyamalan's Glass. Boy, am I already just terribly embarrassed. You know, when I got sick late last week, I started running repeats, ones that had been requested of me, ones that aired around the time of Christmas and ramping up into the new year. My top 10 lists of things I enjoyed most of 2018 and what I'm most looking forward to in 2019 and what I hope to not have to broadcast. And thankfully, I'm back behind the mic right before it would have come to this, was my top 10 most anticipated films of 2019, number one of which was Glass. And apparently, I bought cinematic Bitcoin. I staked my claim to a valueless film, if 9 out of 10 critics, 8 out of 10 viewers are to be believed. And I think that they are. That Glass just doesn't, pardon the pun, cut it. I think about M. Night Shyamalan. Well, first of all, a couple of die-hard Shyamalan fans and fans of Unbreakable and Split, which I count myself among them. But there exists a certain genus of fans, be it for Marvel or DC or Star Wars or Star Trek. They're always going to rally behind. It's like having a favorite sports team. They will always find the best things to say about a shitty situation. And so while there is nary a positive review to be found on IMDb, Metacritic, Rotten Tomatoes, where I believe Glass's current score is like 34%, might be 36. But there is a certain kind of fan who, no matter what, will say, oh, no, you're missing it. You don't understand. It's so great, and here's why. So I saw an article earlier today on, I think it was comicbook.com, where it said, just so you know, fans are giving it much higher ratings than critics. So I opened up the link thinking, oh, well, you know, I still do want to see Glass very badly. I still did love Unbreakable. I will say that Split is a more complicated film, one that kind of does a 10 Cloverfield Lane on Unbreakable by making it a film about a sociopath or psychopath or both probably with dissociative identity disorder, and to cast James McAvoy to play 21 different characters brilliantly. All this in a genre that would essentially be called suspense/horror, where he's abducted these young women and where he causes carnage and death and trauma and fear everywhere he goes. Then at the end, to tack on that twist ending, and it's like, oh, this was a sequel to Unbreakable. The magic of that, combined with what a genuinely good film Split would have been without that ending, I will say I am one of the many people who read too much into that and who did too much associating, like, wow, that was a really solid film, something we haven't seen from Shyamalan in quite a while. McAvoy was a revelation. The supporting cast members were all quite competent. It was reasonably well directed. It was fine. And then, oh, David Dunn, oh my God. And I sort of fell for it. It is not in any way that makes sense a sequel to Unbreakable, although in Glass, certainly in the promotional films and trailers and scenes that we saw leading up to the release, which again is not until this Friday, but it made it seem as though, okay, now we're going to connect these characters, all three of them, Mr. Glass, played by Samuel Jackson, the Horde/the Beast, played by James McAvoy, and David Dunn, played by a guy who, much like M. Night Shyamalan, some days you get him on a good day, and some days you get him on a bad, and whichever version you get is just the one you're going to have to deal with, Bruce Willis. It seems as though those two very unpredictable characters, Willis and Shyamalan, really dropped the ball. But again, these fans, they didn't go to Metacritic or IMDb or Rotten Tomatoes to show their support for Glass and M. Night Shyamalan, and their love for Glass as what they consider to be the grand finale in the Unbreakable trilogy now. But what they are doing is tweeting, and the tweets are frankly a little bit embarrassing. First of all, there's a new hashtag, which is hilarious. But considering that these people wrote it with complete sincerity, it's rather sad. I could never participate in this particular sport, a sport that they are referring to and hashtagging Shyamalanathon. Oh my God. All right, first off, that's very witty. Congratulations to whoever coined it. And 1,000 gold doubloons to anyone who could handle it. Halfway through Lady in the Water, I'd tap out. When you hear the word narf for the 19th time in one spoken paragraph of dialogue, that's when I would say, pass me the Gatorade, I'm out. Shyamalanathon over. I hope we raise money for a good cause, because this was painful. Now, I'm not judging Glass yet. I'm owning up to something I got wrong about Split and that I think many others did. I'm still very eager to see it, but while acknowledging that critics are certainly not always correct, that they often get things wrong, that they often are prejudiced in some form or another because of an interaction they've had in the past with the studio. It is shocking how petty both the press and the entertainment industry can really be when they want to. So I'm not giving my final verdict until I've sat through as much of this film as I can sit through, which ideally will be the whole thing, and I'd love to leave with a smile on my face, and I might. But what these tweets are doing to justify how great the movie is and why the reviewers all don't get it is that you've got to watch Unbreakable and then Split and then Glass. Glass, and then you've run your Shyamalanathon. So that I could actually do. I did enjoy those two films. I enjoyed Unbreakable a great deal, but I'm quite certain that at least a large majority of the reviewers take into account the most highly publicized fact of this film, its hook, the reason that people are going to see it. The story that you need to know going in is that it's a sequel to Unbreakable and then Split. So to accuse reviewers of having failed to do a Shyamalanathon, I'm never going to get tired of saying that. Take a shot every time you hear me say Shyamalanathon, starting now. I'm reasonably certain that the critics, even if they didn't immediately sit down and watch the two films before leaving for the press screening of Glass, that they took it into account, that they dug up their favorite memories, maybe watched some highlights on YouTube, that they, in going into this film, all of these journalists at least familiarized themselves with what people had loved and what they had liked or disliked about these films. So that is a specious argument. Another fan of Glass on Twitter makes the same point regarding Glass that I had made regarding Split. This guy, Chris W. Cruz, says, "My final gushing review of the night for the Shyamalanathon. If you doubt James McAvoy's acting prowess ever, you should be eaten by the beast. Period. Holy crap, he played 21 personalities." Yes, that was also true of Split, which was largely a self-contained movie. What everyone seems to dislike about Glass is that it rather messily tries to conflate the two films that ultimately really have little in common with each other, other than that they were both the rare, exceptional film from M. Night Shyamalan. I feel like Unbreakable, in a different way than The Sixth Sense, but in some ways that are similar, really benefited from being of its time, or more accurately, before its time. Before we were seeing superhero franchises even begin to dominate the film industry. When superheroes were still a very niche medium, where you still were a little bit embarrassed telling your girlfriend you were buying tickets to Blade and the X-Men. When that was still very nascent. When geek was not said with pride. M. Night Shyamalan did a very good demonstration of what a superhero film could and perhaps should be. He was not only ahead of his time, but really innovative, quite bold, great casting choices, direction choices, an excellent story well told. One that perhaps in this day and age, it is viewed through a different lens now. Many of the people who are going to see Glass this week weren't alive when Unbreakable premiered. And so the context is unimaginably important. That this film could have existed and succeeded in so many ways at a time when Avengers Endgame would be laughed out of any executive or investor's meeting room. Like, oh, you're going to make a tentpole franchise out of superheroes from the comics? Seriously? Get out. So Shyamalan managed to put a rather serious, yet kind of comic booky spin on the genre. And this, after all, was aimed at an audience that was still coming down from a terrible 90s hangover of the Joel Schumacher-directed Batman films that really made me want to never go to the movies again. Made me think that superheroes on film had run into a dead end. Shyamalan knew better. He had a vision, and he saw it through. And yet it's important to note that all of his successes, Unbreakable included, kind of involve catching lightning in a bottle. It seems that Shyamalan really trusts his instincts and is averse to critics. You know, if you can sit through Lady in the Water, in which he casts himself as a sort of messiah figure. Well, first of all, it all revolves around someone's creative endeavors, who lingers in sort of semi-obscurity, but who has prophesied that one day people will understand his work and really get it, and it'll change the world for the better. That the author of this work happened to be, starring himself and directing himself, M. Night Shyamalan. I don't have a psychology degree, but there was clearly a statement there that said, hey, my first film came out when I was like, 24. It has spawned a meme. It has spawned generations of memes. It is a household word. This is a condition with which I'm familiar. This is a condition I've suffered from, where almost self-taught, you're a minnow, you're a tadpole, and you make your debut on the world stage, and it is a massive commercial and critical success. I think that in Shyamalan's case, and again, I have, in a much less high-profile way, local radio, nothing you would have probably heard of 9/10 of this current audience I've got here on this podcast. But I did become a little bit immune to too much outside criticism. Like, hey, I got my first job ever in radio. It's in New York City, the #1 market, at the radio station where I interned, where I always wanted to work, and where multiple people, from the executives of the company that owns the station to my own family members, had told me repeatedly, this job has no future. You're certainly never going to be an on-air personality. And then one day I was. And while my program director at that station, K-Rock, was admittedly a sociopath, this is known. This is something he's proud of. I nonetheless, even to more reasonable voices, as time went on, and I found that some of my coworkers who'd been doing this for years were kind of coasting. I didn't realize that that was a warning sign. What it made me think was that I'm young, I'm on fire, my instincts are clearly right, this guy doesn't know what the hell he's doing, I'm going to keep doing things my way. Now, I don't actually feel bad about the content I put out there, but I do feel bad that I developed a closed-mindedness that potentially shut out some very constructive voices voices. Again, in my case, I don't think those constructive voices were really there because, as I mentioned, my program director was a raving lunatic. And no one else, no one in my family, none of the executives at Infinity or CBS or Westinghouse or whatever they were calling themselves on that day, none of them were qualified really to say this is or is not a good radio personality. These were people who, when I began my internship with them, hired a guy named the Grease Man to do nights, a personality who was extraordinarily highly paid and who, to my knowledge and to my ears, was just every awful cliche dialed up to 11, just the worst of radio, almost like a parody. Now, eventually, he did lose his job and his career entirely, because it turns out that in addition to being those things, Greaseman was also a virulent racist who said appalling things. But Shyamalan, think about it. You're making your first film. It is a different time. The world is changing. But just before it does, at the end of the 90s, you make your debut film. You make it through the cutthroat studio system that takes most aspiring directors, chews them up and spits them out before they ever manage to get anything out there in theaters. And it's a massive hit. I See Dead People becomes the That's What She Said of that era. It is, I don't want to give him too much of a pass here, but if I were M. Night Shyamalan, if that sequence of events had happened to me, that I basically got out of film school, produced a film, and became a pop culture phenomenon overnight, I can see how I might be at risk and how Shyamalan might really have suffered from, and I believe he did, a belief in one's own instincts that's so strong that it closes the mind and the ears to possible constructive criticism. So obviously, given The Sixth Sense and given Unbreakable, it's fair to say, objectively, that many of Shyamalan's instincts are very good. Because when he does a film that I like, or that the population in general likes a great deal, a film that becomes part of the zeitgeist like Unbreakable and, of course, The Sixth Sense, and still showing signs of life after many, many duds in between, Split was, as I said, perhaps better suited not being part of the Unbreakable universe, such as that is. But nonetheless, it was a great movie by any standards. So my thoughts about Shyamalan are this. He peaked way too early. He peaked with his first film. What that does to someone as relatively youthful, comparatively youthful as Shyamalan was then, at the beginning of what is going to be a long and winding career. I think some of the danger there, because you do want to give yourself a pat on the back when you're a massive success right out the gate. That is reason to celebrate. But what is dangerous about that is that it could endanger you into trusting your own instincts too much at the expense of voices who might, anyone who's seen the Star Wars prequels knows that this happened to George Lucas as well. That eventually you get so far up your own ass, so in love with your instincts, so confident and self-assured and unwilling to be criticized. Because who are you to tell me how to direct a movie? Excuse me, Sixth Sense over here, Unbreakable over here. But I do think that Lady in the Water in particular, and apparently, according to what seems to be critical consensus, Glass, could have benefited from someone saying, listen, I love you, but you do this too much. You do this too rarely. These films don't gel. They stand apart fantastically, but there is no trilogy necessarily here. Why don't you maybe just do a fun Easter egg in which David Dunn hears about the news and it's, oh yeah, remember Unbreakable? Yeah, me too. I love that. Anyway, as to what the critics have to say, very few of them are of the belief that, oh, this was fantastic. Perfect way to close the Unbreakable trilogy. Shyamalan's a genius. He can do no wrong. We forgive him for Lady in the Water. Didn't see anything like that. What I'm seeing are headlines like, M. Night Shyamalan's frustrating Glass isn't unbreakable from USA Today. Glass review. M. Night Shyamalan's deeply unsatisfying thriller from Vox.com. IO9, a website that exists that was founded on the same principles that people who loved Unbreakable love. They're a website that champions superhero movies, genre films, the whole idea of this sort of film. But they're also objective reviewers who tell the truth. And they say Glass is a frustrating, unsatisfying conclusion to the Unbreakable saga. Vulture is no more kind, saying M. Night Shyamalan's Glass congeals on the screen. Yeah, you don't want to congeal. Congealing is generally frowned upon. So that was and still remains my number one most anticipated movie of 2019 because A, I can't go back. I mean, I guess I could re-record that episode, but it would be rather dishonest of me. I'm still very excited for this film, and even the many, many reviews that trashed it, the overwhelming sheer volume of reviews that bash this film is really disturbing. But even they take pains to point out that Sam Jackson is still Sam Jackson, James McAvoy is still McAvoy, and that they both put on dazzling performances that are unfortunately hindered, they say, by bad directing choices from Shyamalan, wooden acting from Bruce Willis, which, those are both phenomena with which we should be very familiar by this point. So it's quite believable. And they also say that the story sort of falls apart, which again, Not trying to crap all over Shyamalan, but that is something we've seen from him before. Only other thing I want to say, having not yet seen Glass and having still got tickets for Friday, and I will review it myself. But the only thing I would add that I noticed, and I actually did do kind of a Shyamalanathon myself, and I did rewatch Split, and I thought, maybe for my own sake, and just because I'm a fan, and with Glass, which at the time I was still highly anticipating, eagerly awaiting to see. On the horizon, try to familiarize myself with who these 21 personalities inside James McAvoy are. Like, which one is the little kid? Which one's the woman? Which one abducted the girls? What are their relationships with each other? And I caught something that I think is an Easter egg. Philadelphia shout out. There was a great episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia several years ago, in which they talk about, hey, Philly's hometown hero, MNightShyamalan. And Dennis gets a job as an extra on a Shyamalan film, and so does Dee, and Frank's his manager. And the thing about Dennis on It's Always Sunny, Dennis, who's brilliantly played by Glenn Howerton, is that, like all the other characters on It's Always Sunny, he started out as sort of somewhat generically unlikable and weird. And then as the series progressed, each of these characters has gone through crazy story arcs that have defined and redefined their character over and over again. And the character of Dennis is now firmly, clearly that of a sexual predator and serial killer. In fact, the phrase serial killer is used to describe Dennis multiple times. And Dennis also is the name of Kevin Wendell Crumb, the guy who's played by James McAvoy in Split. That's the name of the guy who abducts the girls, who wears glasses and scowls, and who is basically a serial killer. And it could very easily be coincidence, but it might also be a little, hey, friendly pat back at you from one Philly success story to another. That's certainly how I choose to see it. And I choose to think about stuff like that, weird sort of trivia, distract myself. So I go into this film with an open mind, because I've seen many films that the critics hated and loved them. And I want to remain as open-minded as possible. All I'm going to say about Glass, all that I can say, and all that seems really worth reporting on, is that the critical consensus, and this includes many bloggers, so it's not just the press such as it is, it's everyone with a website. About 75 to 77% of them are tremendously disappointed in Glass. Thought Split was overwhelmingly better, that Unbreakable remains to them unbreakable, and that this is a really shitty way to close off the trilogy. Now, I hope that that turns out to not be true. I hope that I come back and go, listen, critics are wrong. It's just like the character in Lady in the Water. Several years from now, Glass will improve the world with its wisdom. But I remain open to either option, or to just finding myself nonplussed. I'm looking forward to it, though. I'll be catching that on Friday night and reviewing it by Monday of next week. Why not get in touch with the Matt Sager podcast in the meantime? Email matt@mattsager.com or call 646-535-4788. You can also get me on social media, where on Twitter, I'm @MattSager. On Instagram, I'm Real Matt Sager, and on Facebook, let's see, I've got a bunch of pages there. My personal page is The Matt Sager. My voiceover page is Matt Sager VO, and this podcast page is Matt Sager Podcast. Also, check out the links in the description for tonight's podcast episode for links to both my Patreon, patreon.com/Matt Sager, and my merch store, featuring coffee mugs, t-shirts, hoodies, stickers, and much, much more from my friends at wehavemerch.com. As for everything else, my voiceover reels and contact info, articles, blog posts, archive back episodes of this podcast, and more, you can find all of that at mattsagervoiceover.com.